They tried to shame the infertile alien princess with a human, but she shocked them all. Seraphine, the princess of the mighty Restrian Empire, stood in front of the grand window in her palace, gazing out at the stars. The night sky glittered, and for a moment it felt as though she could escape her reality, her royal duties, her family's expectations. But the feeling never lasted. The truth always pulled her back, the truth of what she was. The council's decision was final. The day of her wedding had been set. Seraphine wasn't like other princesses. She wasn't known for her beauty or charm. Instead, her reputation had been built on something far more valuable, her lineage. The Restrian royal bloodline was one of the oldest in the galaxy, and it carried great weight. The people revered it, and the empire expected nothing less than perfection from its rulers. But there was one thing that Seraphine couldn't provide, no matter how hard she tried: an heir. She had been infertile since birth, a condition that no one spoke of openly but that everyone knew was her greatest shame. To make matters worse, the royal family had always believed that Seraphine was destined to rule. And as the only child of the emperor and empress, the pressure on her was immense. The council had a solution, though, a solution that would end the shame they believed was dragging the royal family down. They would marry her to a human. Humans were a species from Earth, a planet on the fringe of galactic civilization. The humans were known for their adaptability and resilience, but they were also considered a lesser species in the eyes of the galactic elite. They didn't possess the long-standing legacy of the Restrians or the advanced technologies that many other species had mastered. But the council didn't care about these details. The marriage wasn't about love or even compatibility. It was a simple political move, a symbol of the Restrians' willingness to integrate with other species, especially Earthlings, who had recently become more involved in galactic affairs. The fact that the chosen human would be her husband was just a formality, a way to save face. Seraphine's mind raced as the council's decision echoed in her ears. She had never met this human, had no idea who he was or why he was chosen. All she knew was that he would play the role of a husband to her in public, an image of stability for the people. The rest of their relationship would be a facade. The thought of being married to someone she didn't know, someone who didn't understand her world, filled her with dread. How could she marry a man who was nothing more than a pawn in this political game? How could she, the proud heir of the Restrian throne, allow herself to be reduced to a tool for appeasing the masses? The door to her chamber opened, and her father, Emperor Zareth, entered. He was a towering figure, dressed in the ornate robes of his station, his face a mask of sternness. He looked at Seraphine with a mixture of concern and determination. "You've heard the news, Seraphine," he said, his voice low. "The council has made its decision. The human will be arriving soon." Seraphine didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the stars outside, though she wasn't truly seeing them. Her thoughts were clouded, her mind heavy with the weight of her destiny. The future of the Restrian Empire, her family's legacy, and the expectations placed upon her were all at stake. "Father," she began, her voice breaking the silence, "why must it be this way? Why must I marry a human? Do you truly believe this is the solution?" Zareth sighed deeply, walking over to where she stood. His hand rested gently on her shoulder, though there was no warmth in the gesture. "This is not a matter of choice, Seraphine," he replied. "This is a matter of duty. The people need to see that you are fulfilling your role, that you are willing to sacrifice for the good of the Empire. This union will strengthen our ties with Earth. It will show the galaxy that the Restrians are open to new alliances." "But what about my choice, father?" Seraphine's voice grew stronger, a hint of defiance creeping into her tone. "What about my life, my future? Is it not mine to control?" Zareth's expression hardened, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "You will do what is required of you. The Restrian bloodline is too important to be questioned. You will marry this human, and you will make it work for the good of the Empire." Seraphine stared at him, feeling a surge of anger and frustration. She had never been allowed the freedom to choose her own path, to make her own decisions. The weight of the Empire's legacy was always on her shoulders, and now it seemed as though it would crush her entirely. She turned away, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that had already been made for her. She would marry the human. She would do her duty, no matter how much it hurt. But deep down, she wondered if there was more to her than this, more than just a figurehead, more than a pawn in a galactic game. And if there was, she wasn't sure if anyone would ever let her find it. The days leading up to Marcus' arrival were filled with tension. The palace was buzzing with preparations for the ceremony, and Seraphine could feel the weight of every step, every whisper that followed her. The council's expectations were clear. She was to show that she was not a disappointment, not a failure, and that she was willing to play the part of the perfect princess. But inside, Seraphine felt like a prisoner, trapped in a life she never asked for. On the day Marcus was to arrive, the palace was even more adorned than usual. Long banners hung from the ceiling, glowing lights illuminated every corner, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Seraphine stood in front of the mirror in her chamber, adjusting the ornate dress that had been chosen for her. It was beautiful, but it felt like another prison, a gilded cage that kept her from being truly herself. She hated the way she looked in it. The dress was intricate, flowing with elaborate designs that symbolized her family's royal status, but it didn't represent who she was or what she wanted to be. She wasn't just a piece of jewelry to be shown off, nor a diplomatic tool to be used when needed. As she turned away from the mirror, her eyes met those of her mother, Queen Nyra, who had entered the room silently. Unlike Seraphine's father, who ruled with a commanding presence, Nyra had a calm, almost passive demeanor. She never challenged Seraphine's decisions, nor did she ever show true emotion. It was almost as if she had accepted her place in life. Her role as the queen was more about status than anything else. "You look beautiful, my dear," Nyra said quietly, almost too quietly, as if the words were more for her own comfort than Seraphine's. Her hands rested lightly on the edges of Seraphine's dress. "This is what's best for us, for the Empire." Seraphine looked into her mother's eyes but saw no warmth. There was only resignation. "Is it, mother?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Is this truly what's best for me?" Nyra sighed, her face showing a brief flash of sorrow before it returned to its impassive state. "Sometimes we must make sacrifices for the greater good. You understand this, don't you, Seraphine?" The words stung. Seraphine nodded but felt her heart growing colder. She didn't want to make sacrifices. She wanted to live freely, to have the chance to carve her own path. But instead, she was being forced into a marriage with a man she didn't know, from a world she had never been to, just to satisfy her family's desire to maintain their power and their control over the empire. When the time finally came for Marcus to arrive, Seraphine stood in the grand hall, waiting. The walls around her were lined with the faces of her ancestors, kings, queens, and warriors who had built the empire. They stared down at her as though they knew what was happening, as though they knew she would be the one to challenge everything they had fought for. The doors to the hall opened with a loud creak, and Seraphine's breath caught in her chest. The man who stepped through the doorway wasn't what she expected. He was tall, dressed in the simple military attire of an Earth soldier, a stark contrast to the extravagant clothing of the Restrians. His dark hair was cropped short, his face rugged and serious, with a few scars that told stories of battles fought on distant planets. Seraphine could see the confusion in his eyes as he took in the grandeur of the palace. He didn't belong here. Neither of them did. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment there was a strange, unspoken understanding between them. He was just as out of place as she was. Marcus stepped forward, and the tension in the room was palpable. The nobles, the council members, and the servants all watched in silence. They were witnessing the first meeting between the princess and the human who was to be her husband. But to Seraphine, it felt like they were spectators at a show, waiting to see how this tragedy would unfold. "I'm Marcus," the human said, his voice low and steady. "I'm honored to be here." Seraphine didn't respond immediately. Her eyes studied him, taking in his appearance, his posture, and the way he held himself. He wasn't intimidated by the opulence of the palace, nor by the stares of the royal family. He seemed almost indifferent to it all, as if it didn't matter to him. "I am Seraphine," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "and you are here at my family's request, not mine." Marcus nodded, though his expression didn't change. "I understand. But that doesn't mean we can't make this work." Seraphine wanted to laugh bitterly. How could he be so calm, so confident? He didn't know what she was going through, what was expected of her. He didn't understand that this wasn't just a marriage. It was a way to save her family's honor, a way to cover up her infertility, and provide a public figure to help maintain the royal bloodline. The council had chosen Marcus as a symbol of their willingness to cooperate with Earth. But in doing so, they had completely disregarded her needs, her emotions, and her own sense of dignity. For a moment, Seraphine felt a pang of anger. Why should she be forced into a marriage with a stranger? Why should her worth be tied to her ability to bear children? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she tried to maintain her composure. She was the princess of the Restrian Empire, not a breeding vessel. As the ceremony began, Marcus and Seraphine were escorted to the royal stage, where the council members stood, watching intently. The formalities proceeded, with each word spoken emphasizing the political importance of their union. But as the ceremony dragged on, Seraphine found herself withdrawing into her thoughts. She couldn't bring herself to care about the vows they were exchanging. They meant nothing to her. But then, as the last part of the ceremony approached, Marcus turned to her, his eyes softening for the first time. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "I don't want this to be just for show, Seraphine. I want to know you. I want to understand your world." Seraphine met his gaze, and for the first time since their meeting, she saw sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a man trying to please the council or fulfill a duty. It was the look of someone who, despite everything, genuinely wanted to make a connection. But was it enough? Was it enough to break through the walls she had built around herself? Seraphine wasn't sure. All she knew was that nothing in her life had ever felt real, and she wasn't sure if this would be any different. Days turned into weeks after the marriage ceremony. Despite the promises of cooperation and unity, the tension between Seraphine and Marcus remained palpable. While they had shared their vows before the council, the weight of those words was not enough to bridge the gap between them. To the people of Restria, the marriage was a political union, a show of strength, and a promise to the empire. But to Seraphine, it felt like a gilded cage, even more so when Marcus remained distant, adhering strictly to the formalities. The palace was vast, with its endless halls and grand chambers, but it felt smaller with each passing day. Every corner seemed to carry the echo of expectations. Seraphine's family, especially her father, Emperor Zareth, watched them closely, constantly reminding her of the responsibility that came with her title. Her mother, Queen Nyra, remained silent, as always, her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast, as if resigned to the world that was set before her. In the quiet of her chambers, Seraphine found herself questioning everything. She often stared out the window at the endless sky, wondering if it held any answers. The stars seemed far away, unreachable, just as her dreams of freedom had become. She was trapped by the very legacy that had once promised so much. Marcus, too, seemed to be struggling with his own sense of purpose. Though he had been chosen to marry her, he had no personal stake in the matter beyond what the empire demanded. To him, the wedding had felt like a forced duty, an arrangement made by those who saw him as a mere tool. The cold walls of the palace seemed to close in around him too, and he found himself seeking ways to escape the stifling pressure of the situation. It wasn't that Marcus didn't respect Seraphine, he did in his own way. But he knew little of the world she came from, and the culture shock was overwhelming. His earthly life had been simple by comparison, far from the grandeur and the complexity of Restria. The people here were different, their values unfamiliar. Yet, as time passed, he began to understand that the real challenge wasn't the politics of their marriage, but the emotional distance that seemed to stretch between him and the princess. One evening, as the two of them stood before the grand dining table, the silence was thick enough to slice through. Marcus, trying to break through the ice that had formed between them, ventured into unknown territory. "Seraphine," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I've been thinking." Seraphine looked at him for the first time in what felt like days. She raised an eyebrow but didn't speak, waiting for him to continue. "I don't think this marriage is just about us," Marcus continued. "I don't think it was ever about us. It's about what people think, what they expect, but I don't care about that." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She had always lived under the crushing weight of expectation, her family's, her empire's, and now the council's. And here was Marcus, a stranger to her world, saying he didn't care. A part of her wanted to be angry, to dismiss him for his naivete. But another part, the part she had buried for so long, felt something stir within her. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what it's like to live in this cage, to be constantly watched, constantly judged." Marcus took a step closer, his expression softening. I may not understand everything, but I do know what it's like to feel trapped. And I can tell you one thing, Seraphine, you're not alone in this. We don't have to play the roles they've given us, not if we don't want to. Seraphine's gaze faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. And what do you expect us to do then? Run away from it all? I'm not saying we run away, Marcus replied, his tone firm yet compassionate. But I am saying we should try to find something real in all of this, something between us. Seraphine looked at him, studying his face. For the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. There was no judgment there, no expectation, only the genuine desire to connect. It was a sharp contrast to the cold indifference of her family, the political games, and the endless manipulation. But she had been trained from a young age to ignore emotions like this. Love, affection, they were luxuries she could not afford. As a ruler, she had always been taught to keep her heart in check, to lead with her mind, not her feelings. But here was Marcus, a human from Earth, offering her something she had never been allowed to experience: honesty. I don't know what you expect from me, Seraphine said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not what you think I am. I'm not like the women you know. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes filled with an understanding she hadn't expected. I don't expect you to be anything, Seraphine. I just want to get to know you. I want to understand who you really are. The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. She had spent so long hiding behind the walls of duty and expectation that she didn't even know who she was anymore. All she knew was what others expected her to be, the perfect princess, the dutiful heir, the future ruler, but none of those things felt like her. They felt like roles she had been forced to play. Seraphine turned away, unable to meet his gaze any longer. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can live this life, wear this mask, and be what they want me to be. Marcus stood still, giving her the space she needed. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But I can promise you one thing, I'm not going anywhere, not until you figure this out. You don't have to be alone. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had never known anyone who would stand by her like this. She had always been alone in her struggles, isolated by her position, her family's expectations, and the heavy burden of her royal duties. For the first time, Seraphine felt a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was enough to make her question everything she had believed in. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. Maybe there was a way to break free from the chains of her past. But before she could say anything else, the doors to the dining hall opened abruptly. Her father, Emperor Zareth, entered with the usual authority that defined him. The moment was broken, and the world outside crept back in, reminding her that there was no escape. Seraphine, her father's voice cut through the room, his tone stern, the council has requested your presence. There are matters to discuss. Seraphine straightened her back, the mask returning to her face. She nodded, not saying a word to Marcus. She had to go, but for the first time she felt a small shift within herself, a crack in the walls she had built. She would do her duty, of course. But now, she wasn't so sure if that was all she had to do. The tension in the palace had become unbearable. Each day felt like a performance, with Seraphine and Marcus playing their roles for the sake of the Empire, yet neither truly connected with the other. The quiet moments they had shared were fleeting, drowned out by the weight of their responsibilities and the ever-watchful eyes of the council. The pressure was mounting, and Seraphine felt it tightening around her chest like a vice. Her father, Emperor Zareth, had made it clear. Her marriage to Marcus was not just for show. It was an essential part of securing the future of their empire. She had to prove to the people that she was capable of leading, capable of fulfilling her duty, despite her infertility. But the more Seraphine thought about it, the more she realized that her life was no longer her own. It had become a tool, a means to an end for those in power. One evening, after a long day of official ceremonies and endless meetings with the council, Seraphine stood on the balcony of her chamber. The stars twinkled overhead, a reminder that there was a vast universe out there, far beyond the walls of her palace. The wind was cool against her skin, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting the breeze carry away the heavy thoughts that weighed on her. Marcus had been absent for most of the day, busy with his own duties and meetings with the council. It was the first time in weeks that Seraphine had been truly alone, and she found herself thinking of him. Despite their differences and the political game they were both forced to play, she couldn't deny that there was something about him that made her feel seen. Not just as the princess, the future ruler, but as a person. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered if there was more to life than the duty she had always been taught to uphold. The soft click of the door behind her startled her, and she turned to see Marcus standing there, his expression unreadable. He had a habit of appearing when she least expected him, yet he always seemed to know when she needed someone to talk to. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice calm. Seraphine nodded, stepping aside to allow him in. He walked over to the railing beside her, his gaze lifting to the stars above. For a moment, neither of them spoke, as if the silence between them held more meaning than words could convey. "You've been quiet," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "Is everything all right?" Seraphine hesitated. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was more that she had never been taught to share her feelings, especially not with someone like him. But as she looked at him, something inside her shifted. He had never tried to push her into anything, never tried to make her conform to the expectations of the court. There was no pressure from him, no hidden agenda, and that was something she wasn't used to. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore," Seraphine said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this." Marcus turned to face her, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" "I don't know who I am without the crown, without my title," she replied, her voice breaking. "All my life, I've been told what to do, how to act, who to be, and now I don't even know if I want it anymore. I never had the chance to choose, Marcus. My whole life has been about fulfilling someone else's expectations." There was a pause, a long moment where Seraphine wondered if she had said too much, but Marcus didn't judge her. He stepped closer, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to be just the princess, Seraphine," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're more than that. You've always been more than that." Seraphine's heart raced at his words, but she wasn't sure if she could believe them. Could she really be more than the sum of her royal duties? Was there even a place for her to be more than what everyone expected her to be? "I don't know how to change that," she said, shaking her head. "How do I become something else when everyone around me sees me as the princess, the heir to the throne? How do I break free from the expectations that have been placed on me my whole life?" Marcus was silent for a moment, considering her words carefully. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You don't have to do it alone, you know," he said quietly. "You're not trapped. You've got choices, whether you believe it or not. You don't have to keep playing the role everyone expects you to. Maybe it's time to start living for yourself." Seraphine stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, to take that step into the unknown, but fear held her back, fear of failure, fear of disappointing everyone she had ever known. "But what about the Empire?" she asked, her voice strained. "What about the people who depend on me? What about my family?" Marcus reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "The Empire can't just depend on you, Seraphine. You can't carry that weight alone. It's not just your responsibility to fix everything. The people, they'll follow you because of who you are, not just because of your title. But if you keep pretending to be something you're not, you'll never be able to lead them." His words echoed in her mind, each one sinking deeper into her heart. She had spent so long trying to fulfill the role that had been carved out for her. But what if Marcus was right? What if she could lead, not as the princess she had always been, but as the person she truly was? "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Marcus said firmly. "You've always been strong, you just need to believe it." For the first time, Seraphine felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of possibility that she had never allowed herself to entertain. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the power to shape it. As the night stretched on, they stood together in silence, the weight of their conversation settling between them. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if offering their approval, and for the first time in a long time, Seraphine allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the cage she had been trapped in. Seraphine's mind raced as she stood at the edge of the grand balcony, looking out over the palace grounds. The night was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of the city and the occasional whisper of the wind. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling within her. Her thoughts felt like a storm, one that she had spent her whole life trying to calm. But no matter how hard she tried, the questions remained. What was her purpose? What was she meant to do? For so long, Seraphine had believed that her life was set in stone. She had been taught to think that she had no choice in the matter, that her role as the princess, as the future ruler, was the only path available to her. But everything had changed since Marcus had come into her life. The quiet moments they had shared, the conversations they had opened her eyes to the truth. She didn't have to be just the princess. She didn't have to follow the path that had been laid out for her. She turned away from the balcony, her heart heavy with the weight of the decisions she had yet to make. It had been weeks since their conversation, and in that time everything had shifted. She had spent hours in deep thought, wrestling with the truth Marcus had shared with her. She could be more than her title. She could lead not as a symbol but as herself. The path was unclear, but for the first time, Seraphine believed that she could walk it. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the Empire's needs, the expectations of the council, the weight of the crown that awaited her. She had always been told that the future of the Restrian Empire depended on her. But now, for the first time, she realized that the future didn't depend on her alone. It depended on the choices she made, choices that could shape the future for herself and her people. But how could she lead if she wasn't free? How could she fulfill her duties when she didn't even know who she truly was? The answer wasn't simple, but it was becoming clearer every day. As Seraphine stood in the quiet of the night, she was no longer the uncertain princess she had once been. She had a plan now, one that would change everything. Marcus entered the room quietly, his presence bringing a sense of calm that Seraphine had come to rely on. He had been there for her when no one else had, and he had shown her that there was more to life than the roles she had been forced to play. She had spent so long hiding behind her title, but now she was ready to step forward as more than just the princess. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've made a decision." Marcus looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He had always been there for her, always supportive, never asking for anything in return. She had come to trust him more than anyone else, and for the first time she realized how much he had helped her find herself. "I'm listening," he said gently, stepping closer. Seraphine took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I can't keep following the path that everyone else has set for me. I need to lead this empire, but I need to do it my way. I need to be true to myself, not to the role they've forced on me." There was a long pause as Marcus took in her words, his expression unreadable. But then, slowly, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I'm proud of you, Seraphine," he said softly. "This is your life. You have the right to make your own decisions." Seraphine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been afraid of disappointing everyone, of stepping away from the expectations that had defined her for so long. But now, with Marcus's support, she felt free. Free to make her own choices, free to be who she truly was. "I've thought about it long and hard," she continued. "And I've come to a decision. I will still marry you, Marcus, but not for the reasons they think. Not to save face for the Empire. We'll do this together, but not as pawns in a game. We'll do it because we choose to." Marcus's eyes softened, and for a moment, Seraphine could see the trust and understanding in them. It wasn't just about political alliances anymore. It was about something real. They were in this together as partners, not as figures on a chessboard. Seraphine took his hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she felt the warmth of his touch. She had never been allowed to feel this way, to make a decision based on her own desires. But now, with Marcus by her side, she felt a sense of power she had never known before. "I know it won't be easy," she said, looking up at him. "There will be challenges, and we will have to face them together. But I won't hide anymore. I won't let anyone dictate who I am or what I should be. We'll rebuild this empire on our terms." Marcus nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll be with you every step of the way, whatever it takes." For the first time, Seraphine felt the weight of the future lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had someone who believed in her, who saw her for who she truly was. It wasn't just about the empire or the crown or the political games that had dominated her life. It was about building something real, something that would last. As they stood there, hand in hand, the future of the Restrian Empire seemed a little less daunting. It wasn't just a future shaped by tradition and expectation. It was a future that they would build together on their own terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance from the council, from her family, and from those who had always believed that Seraphine's worth was tied to her title. But she was ready to face it. She had found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. Together they would create a new future, one that was driven by choice, not by obligation. As Seraphine and Marcus stood side by side, looking toward the horizon, Seraphine knew that her journey was just beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life she felt ready to walk it. Not as the princess everyone expected her to be, but as herself, strong, free, and ready to lead in her own way. And with Marcus by her side, she knew she wouldn't have to face the future alone.